Hey
Hello,
there, Mason.
how are you?
Hi. All
It's nice.
right. How are you?
I'm doing great. It's nice to
Good.
meet you.
Likewise.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah. So I work with Root Tulsa. I don't know if you're familiar with what we do or the sort of projects we're involved in. Are you?
So what I know is information hub for events and happenings and opportunities all throughout the Tulsa community, not strictly related to nonprofits. And now it's been online focused, of course, in the wake
Yeah.
of anything else.
Yeah, we were just building this great website that sort of gathered all the events happening in Tulsa. We had Tulsa Hub events on there and
Mhm.
pretty much anything. And then when COVID-19 hit, we had to switch to virtual only. So we have hosted the virtual events that you guys have gotten up.
Cool.
But
Great.
hopefully sometime this fall, we'll get to roll out the full website. And
Yeah.
yeah.
Awesome.
So I wanted to start off and ask, what's your favorite part of founding and working with Tulsa Hub? I listened to your talk with Patrick Hayes. That's great for anybody who wants to know the
Yeah.
full, the big picture of how this
Yeah.
started. But what's your favorite part of working on this project?
Hmm. Because of my story that you're familiar with in terms of the personal suffering and tragedy and trauma that I went through, I suppose every time I get to share some kindness with people, it amplifies the situation of healing for me. And so this is a social service organization, and when I started the organization when I was 23 years old, I had previously been living up in Chicago, and I had a couple of opportunities in college to do some, volunteering, some service through college classes and things like that. But at that time in my life, I'd never really been engaged in selfless service. And so, because of how intense, the setback was from the personal trauma and then all the family trauma and the grief that I was going through, when I had the opportunity to just open up the Tulsa Hub workshop and invite the public and see what happened, I everybody that I got to work with, it was a situation that typically solved problems in the short term. But then when people would reinvest in Tulsa Hub with their time and with their energy and with their referrals, it just felt so amazing to just dive into the unknown and then to be received, to be able to give so fully, and then to make such incredible relationships with people that otherwise I don't know if I would have been compelled to engage with. I'd mentioned in there that my family was a working class family. And so it wasn't that volunteerism wasn't a part of our culture, living with my single mom. It was just that she worked two jobs. And as
Yeah.
soon as I was 16, I started working and school and all of that stuff. So coming out onto my own, like my mentality was very much about my own survival. But having had to take that pause that I did because of the trauma and the grief, I knew that if I wasn't going to get myself directly in as much service and as much giving, that I wouldn't feel like the reason that I had the privilege to survive all of those, like truly near-death experiences would have been as fulfilled if I wouldn't have just opened up a total giving, compassionate, and loving and caring social service agency. But yeah, getting to love people through my love of cycling still is the most rewarding aspect about being involved with Tulsa Hub.
That's great. And something that struck me about your story is that you really tell your story in a way that you were learning about activism, learning about empowerment and advocacy. It's not something that just comes to people naturally or that they're born with. It's something that has to be developed. And for you, that was cycling and that sort of outreach. But what are other ways or resources that people can learn more about that, specifically with your organization?
Hmm. Tulsa Hub, it's a tricky situation, and I want to give some respect to where we are in history. Today, June
Mm.
4th, the 99th anniversary of one of the most intense, massacres that happened on United States soil, right, took place in our neighborhood, in the neighborhood of Tulsa Hub's warehouse, at least, which is
Yeah.
edging on the Greenwood district. And when again, my personal story, my parents, there wasn't continuity and safety in my own personal life, right? So because I was so focused on my own survival, it wasn't the most intuitive thing for me to think about caring for others. For people that don't necessarily have those same barriers, though, let's say they have a little bit more privilege, right? That doesn't discount their own experiences of their own loss, of their own grief, of their own, however they define their own trauma, right? And so where we're at this moment in history, specifically to your question with Tulsa, we've received some of our younger staff or volunteers who are more active on social media. I personally I've chosen not to have a presence on social media. It has a little bit to do with me being an older millennial and kind of missing that, being as natural as a part of my day-to-day life, and being influenced by people of older generations too, that have, found that it makes more sense just to not participate, right? But I do value the tool of it. And Tulsa Hub now is, privileged enough to have a full-time staff person for the first time in our history that manages our social media. Our mission is about getting bicycles to people that need them for primary transportation. Most of those people are first and foremost people of low income. So we work more from a class solidarity kind of framework rather so much than race, admitting that people of color are, overwhelmingly don't have as much access to affluence as people that happen to be white, right? So even though that wasn't my personal story, I see that there's these layers of nuance that are opening up now where Tulsa Hub needs to have more conversations. Our board is very small. Our staff is very small. There's 4 of us full-time, 3 of whom, besides me, basically, that are high risk to the COVID exposure. So there's a perception sometimes in the community that sees a social media organization that has a, vibrant content out there, right? And might assume that translates to a lot of power and a lot of capacity in terms of the actual manpower and the bodies in the organization. Again, Tulsa Hub is 4 full-time staff people, 3 part-timers, most of us who also have families and volunteer engagements and other things outside, right? So our ability to rise to the demand inherent in our programs always has to be our first goal. There's this delicate balance of building an organization where you've got to grow capacity. So you need to be marketing and putting out calls for volunteers and offering volunteer engagement that maybe is diverse beyond what the primary mission is. That's been the biggest challenge for me as a person that's wanted to not only continue to give, because the public brings bicycles to Tulsa Hub every day to make available as inputs to our program. The challenge is those inputs may need hours of skilled labor as well as tens to hundreds of dollars of real money to go into those inputs to make them capable to be outputs for our mission, right? So opening up to the public the days at the very beginning when Tulsa Community Foundation provided me a facility that Elgin Park Pizza is in now, 218 North Elgin, across the street from where the ballpark is built up. I used to just put calls out, and in those days it was more text messages and that kind of thing. Like Twitter had just become a thing. I wasn't even really aware of Facebook at the time, 12 years ago. But we would open up and all these different people would come. Most people, though, had a need that they also intended to get filled. They weren't there coming for selfless service. Because as you mentioned, it doesn't always occur to people how to engage in that, right? Most people start out with, they've got to get their basic needs covered. And through the course of 12 years of leading a nonprofit, this concept of altruism has been a pretty paradoxical, kind of experience, right? So Tulsa Hub is small. We have a commitment to do our work to the people that need bicycles for their primary transportation. They have no other transportation choices, including utilizing the bus service because of a cost barrier or because the schedule does not meet their needs. Oftentimes people that are, coming out of prison or that are entering the workforce for the first time are limited to the shifts that they're able to pick up. We're talking about, late at night, early in the mornings. weekends, times that the bus just doesn't run. And Tulsa being a very sprawled metropolitan area, if someone is, let's say, released from prison, they're living in a social service agency in the downtown area, they're able to get a job out in East Tulsa or South Tulsa. If they do not have a driver's license, if they do not have a support system, the bus doesn't run, they're not able to fulfill the opportunity of that job, right? If they're missing their transportation. So getting a bike from us has always been our key focus. When I was doing the production for the bicycles, the teaching of the classes, the accepting of the donations, thank you notes did not get sent on time. Charitable contribution receipts did not get sent on time. It took time to build the capacity of the processes and of the systems of the company just to steward people's contributions. And if people aren't feeling acknowledged for their contributions, they may choose pretty quickly not to continue their relationship of giving, right? So that translates beyond money. It's also time and interest. We think these days about how immediate our communication has become and how that addiction to immediacy really causes people to be very reactive and can be pretty judgmental too with regard to their expectations not being met. So all that to say, even now with a staff of 7 people, we're not able to address every need that comes to our door. And it's not because we don't have interest or care. It's that to survive, we've had to stay kind of myopic on our mission. So of the everybody doing everything within the Tulsa Hub organization, our interim CEO, for example, is also an educator. She is also doing the tasks of the accountant.
Mm-hmm.
Our board of directors comes not only to, and there's 5 people, full-time working people on that board that come not only to support the inputs and the stewardship of the program, but also some of the evaluation pieces of it too. And then the last thing I want to say that, for anyone out there that's interested in, potentially taking a risk to not pursue a normal track of trying to find a job and make money and then become philanthropically engaged in an organization, someone that wants to personally take the risk of starting an organization or joining an organization to give more of their time and their influence, right? Because most people don't have both. They don't have an excess of time and money and influence, right? You've got to pick within that spectrum. So for people that might be interested in, letting themselves open up to a completely different experience of service, there's so many parts and pieces that go into fulfillment of these program services, and the evaluation aspect, what our donors are expecting in terms of us being able to report on outcomes. The people that we serve are not people that have the same level of comfort and convenience of people that have the privilege to be able to volunteer and to give, right? So just the ability, we can say that our schedule is a certain schedule. Well, the people that we're looking to serve aren't always able to operate within the same constraints of time, right? Their time accountability is just not as capable as people that have comfort and convenience of being able to drive, of being able to, work from a awesome Wi-Fi kind of situation. As we've adapted to try to keep our services available to people that truly need them, the process has gone so much slower. And so for folks that are used to, they feel safe with immediate communication, with immediate follow-up, with immediate, reframing and replanning and all of that, we've just not been able to fulfill those expectations. And so over the years, our volunteer base has waxed and waned. And as I said, people that come in thinking that, awesome, I love bikes, I know I'm gonna be able to learn about bikes, so I'll come and I'll start volunteering and I'll get what I need, which is learning how to be a bike mechanic, and I can give to the community through this bike program. They get to our workshop, they're not assigned to a personal mechanic that's gonna teach them. They have to kind of learn on the fly in the midst of a chaotic, downtown facility that is not well lit, that is not air conditioned and climate controlled, that has people from the public coming in and out, that are people that have really intense trauma and suffering in their background. And it can be shocking to someone with very good intentions. They just couldn't have expected how affected their nervous system would be to be in that environment, right?
Right.
So going back to your original question, Tulsa Hub has done its best to focus on where we excel in our mission, which is, as far as I know, we're the only organization in Tulsa and in Oklahoma that is providing a direct, reasonably sustainable transportation option to people. Automobiles, because of a legal, medical, or financial reason, are just not going to be accessible to every individual, right? The
Yeah.
same as bicycling, but for the people that are brave enough and that are willing to overcome the barriers to get through our programs, to get their equipment, the education, the awareness that a bicycle is a legal, safe, and dignified form of transportation, we do our best to stay focused on serving the people that are asking for our primary mission. I want to say our leadership and our staff understand that everything is intersectional, right? We can't just say, well, we are, being better stewards of educating about white supremacy and racism by making sure that marginalized people get bicycles through our programs. There's not an obvious link to those for most of the people that would, look at our mission and that have made comments that we haven't participated, we haven't engaged in actively as we should with regard to what's happening, bringing more awareness to the issues of, white supremacy, police brutality, everything that is hitting the front lines of people's consciousness because of social media right now. But we thought we would do very well doing what we do very well. And we hope that the public will continue to have patience and to have faith that as a very small nonprofit, we'll continue how to figure out how to rise to the occasion of becoming more overtly intersectional and being better allies to the communities that aren't always directly served through our mission programs.
change take Change takes lots of community partners, and you have to have people working over here, working over there, to build a broader system that's able to stand up against those things. So I think what you guys are doing is great in providing a real service to a sector of the community that needs it. And so my next question would be a kind of a two-part question, very much related to what we were just talking about. And how can something as simple as receiving a bicycle change somebody's life? Because those who are more privileged and who have cars and are able just to climb in and go wherever they need to go at any time, how can somebody receiving that, whether it's through your adult cycling empowerment program or otherwise, how have you seen that really change people's lives? And how is cycling also something that builds community and inclusivity?
So the League of American Bicyclists has a phrase that I love, which is that bicycling is a simple solution to so many complex social problems. The Tulsa Hub's mission to change lives through cycling is primarily about mobility, getting from point A to point B. So within a reasonable distance, again, there's all kinds of barriers. There's physical barriers of distance. I'm certainly not going to ride my bicycle if you were in Oklahoma City doing this interview. I would not be choosing that as my mode of transportation to come and visit you, right? And the same goes for if I were to visit the Tulsa Community Foundation headquarters at 71st and Yale on a 99-degree day for a 2:00 appointment. That would not be the most reasonable transportation choice, right? Well, lucky me, I have other choices. For people that don't have other choices, besides the mobility that the bicycle can create, it is a fairly simple machine. The barriers that you would face operating that machine for your transportation, it's pretty accessible for people to educate themselves and to equip themselves with the tools needed. Flat tires are a thing, but carrying a spare tube and a pump means that you can get yourself rolling again within a reasonable amount of time if that's a barrier that you face when you're using your bike for transportation. I am not at all a super skilled mechanic. I had to become a mechanic to start the Tulsa Hub's operations, but as my time as the former CEO and now as the development director lends itself, that's not some skills that I practice. But I use my bike for my primary transportation. I live downtown. I work downtown. The closest grocery store is a reasonable amount of time to ride my bike to. I think a lot of people perceive bicycles as these incredibly complex, like, oh, well, what happens if my gears or my chain or my brakes? I've utilized the same road bike for 10 years, and other than flat tires, there's really not been any other major malfunctions using that bike in all weather that have been barriers that I couldn't overcome. Rain and heat, sure, those are a pain, but there's typically gear that you can get, and secondhand gear and improvised gear affordably. And the heat is just being more mindful about when you travel. In the summertime, I do not try to be outside, making meetings that would force me to work from noon to 4 in the afternoon, right? If I can do my travel in the morning or in the evening, there's that. So building these skills of problem solving, of self-reliance, these are things that help people feel really proud of themselves. They help mental attitude and self-love, right? If you're able to engage in these kinds of activities. So choosing to use a bicycle is a example of how you can improve your confidence and then, become more proud of yourself and improve your self-esteem, right? So there's another benefit besides the mobility. The physical health side, of course. I think Audre Lorde said, those who do not move do not feel their chains. There's so much, I'm not a data wonk at all, but I think most Americans are aware that our sedentary lifestyles, especially now in COVID-19, where we're conducting most of our work sitting still in front of computers, right? Not that it wasn't that way already for a lot of people, they just had the commute. Well, if you get up out of bed, sit in a chair to eat your breakfast, then sit in your car seat, then sit in your work desk, then sit back in your car seat, then sit back in your chair for dinner. Even if you're doing physical exercise during the day, it's not always light impact cardiovascular exercise, right? Which is what a bicycle provides you. So the physical health piece is there for cycling. It's low impact for people that have, bilateral symmetry. It's pretty accessible, and there's adaptive bikes. We just had the opportunity to assemble some bicycles that were provided by the Lions Club for some people that do not have their vision privilege anymore. So people experiencing blindness, people who have, that may not have all of their limbs, people that don't have hearing, people that can't speak, a bicycle can still be accessible to them, right? The way that an automobile wouldn't be. And so I've mentioned the mobility, the physical health, the mental health, and then the esteem and all the good feelings with that. Plus, a bicycle will take you to places that your car can't, whether it's getting out into nature, utilizing the river park system, discovering routes in your neighborhood that you wouldn't think to drive, because arterials are how we're trained to move from point A to point B in cars, because they're typically along straight lines on grids. Whereas neighborhood streets, I've discovered so many beautiful little hidden gems in Tulsa. I've discovered, things that I found in the street and people that I cross paths with that I wouldn't ordinarily. So it can add, new wonder. It can give you kind of like going back to when you ask people the one word that they think of. I'll ask you right now, Mason, when you think of a bike, what's the first word that comes to mind for you out of all the things that a bike might represent?
But I think it's freedom. It's that
Nice.
It's that feeling of just the wind in your face that you don't really get from a car. It's just, you're able to feel a lot more connected with nature. You feel the sun, you feel the earth underneath your tires. And
Yeah.
And then
So freedom is such a quintessential American identity, kind of word, right? A lot of, it's in all of our branding, right? With the United States of America, right? And so freedom is one thing, but independence is another thing, right? So the mobility, the freedom from not feeling well because we're not, myself included, aren't moving enough. And also people that have issues with their weight management or with their, physical health in terms of their cardiovascular health, et cetera, right? And the last thing I'll say, which is not, forefront at all in Tulsa Hub's mission, but a bicycle has a lot less impact on the environment. I don't want to say that it has no impact on the environment, because there is impact to create the bicycle. It needs metal, it needs rubber, it needs all of those things. It needs lubrication for the chains if you've got a chain bike and cables.
But Tulsa Hub is repurposing and refurbishing bikes. So essentially, it's stuff that would be
there are people that are attracted to our mission for the environmental aspect. aspect. And we were honored to win the Sustainable Tulsa's Henry Bellman Award, because not only do we reuse, recycle, repurpose, upcycle, but consider, like, if you can imagine, we have a warehouse that's open to the public on June 6th from 10 a.m. to 1 for a bike sale, a revenue generator, and a resource distribution for the public. But we have this warehouse that we share with River Parks and Oktoberfest. If you can imagine what 800 bicycles looks like, is like a 4,000 square foot warehouse, right? All of those bikes would otherwise be in a landfill or be on a barge that was shipped to China and then rejected, because China is no longer accepting waste from the United States as, you know, fully as they were at one point. So if you can imagine all of that stuff, those raw materials that were transformed into bicycles and then were put into the waste stream for whatever reason, we can keep those in the community. And again, the more trained volunteers that we have, the more selfless servants that we have, the more of those bikes we can get out into the community. And I shouldn't fail to remind, the more donations we receive, the more donors we receive to buy new tires and tubes and new cables to get these, you know, stagnant inputs into our system. We would love to not have a warehouse full of 700 bikes. We would love to get all those bikes under the butts of Tulsa so they can take advantage of all of these wonderful benefits that we just described. They are needing some care and some attention and some parts to be able to achieve that. So there may be something else that I forgot in that whole spectrum, but we touched on a lot of things. Bicycling being a simple solution with a lot of benefits and not a lot of negatives. And for those people out there that are saying, well, what about the safety? I would never feel safe riding my bike, especially in the road. I have to remind, driving is the most dangerous activity any adult will perform in their adult life. It's more dangerous than flying. It's more dangerous than shark diving. It's more dangerous than swimming in a lightning storm. It's something, again, that we kind of just have normalized, and that most of us know. Do you personally, Mason, know of someone that's either been injured or killed in a car crash in your lifetime?
I do, and all of the people I can think of who have been involved in serious bike accidents, it was the driver's fault. So it was a motor
Right.
vehicle responsible
Right.
for
Yeah.
injuring somebody. But I mean, a car is a terrifying thing, and it can be. And
Yeah.
you know, the
And
American
so,
city, especially here in the Midwest, is not really set up for cycling. And I think the city of Tulsa is making some steps. But that was actually one of my questions. You know,
yeah.
what can be done, and how can people engage with their public officials to you know, sort of demand, I guess, that Tulsa be made more cyclist friendly.
So that word demand there, I think, is key, right? You know, as we're seeing with the utilizing the, whether it's the tactic or the strategy of these public protests that have been happening, you know, across the United States and in Tulsa, protests are typically a result of demands not having been heard through other methods, right? I mentioned Tulsa Hub's community, our staff, our volunteers, the people that we serve in our mission. You know, we are a $300,000 budget organization, right? Which is huge for, you know, where we are in our own life cycle, but compared to multi-million-dollar nonprofits that are household names, right? Even billion-dollar, you know, philanthropic organizations, right? Our scale is still quite small. The people, everyone that engages with Tulsa Hub has an interest in cycling, but it's not overwhelmingly bicycling for transportation. You know, several of our staff and our board members live in Broken Arrow, and so it's just not an option. It's just not practical for them to be bike commuters, but they want to have the freedom and the safety to know that they have the choice to ride their bicycles for recreation, for fitness, for whatever else, right? So going back to that word demand, there's been various iterations of bicycling and pedestrian advocacy organizations, because we all know everything is intersectional. And if we're going to simplify everything down to a frame of power and powerlessness, right? Our elected officials have power, they have legal power, they have financial power, they have, you know, numbers, communication power, down to a small nonprofit organization group that maybe has, you know, 50 to several hundred constituents at one time. If we get organized and we decide what we want and we stay consistent with that messaging, there's no reason why the city government wouldn't pay attention and wouldn't want to accommodate that, right? If there's scale. For a small group, a bicycling pedestrian organization, and I mentioned the pedestrian piece too, because pedestrians are cyclists minus the bikes, right? They're vulnerable people that are outside, that are trying to be accommodated safely in their travel from point A to point B, or in their recreation. All of us have an equal investment in the roads and in the sidewalks and the facilities that get people from place to place, right? Our streets and our transportation systems. All of us have an equal investment, but some of us take a much bigger share. Cars have a much bigger, wear and tear on our roadways. They cause a lot more problems than cyclists and pedestrians. And I want to admit, this is a political issue that is probably highly triggering to some people at home watching this. But going back to that demand, right? If there's 50 people in one neighborhood that are demanding that they receive bike lanes on their roadway, that doesn't have the same gravitas as 50,000 people as, a much bigger constituency, right? The elected officials have so much static and chatter. Their jobs are so difficult. And, with regard to their prioritization, when you've got hundreds of people protesting police brutality, of course I think that the mayor should be paying more attention to that issue than to, is there equitable transportation for people that are
pandemic response,
cars, right? There is a hierarchy of the prioritization, but going back to, just the mechanisms of democracy, right? If people are demanding that they get better facilities and accommodations by tweeting and by social media posts, that doesn't have the same impact as people agreeing to go to city council hearings or to personally reach out in a dignified, polite way to their elected officials, start to build relationships, start to understand what the existing priorities and the existing barriers to that person's time and that person's bandwidth are, right? I mean, this is classic kind of organizing 101, right? And I want to give props to our mayor. He has given me his personal time of day. Tulsa Hub is on his radar. We have not ever made demands. We don't have a big enough constituency that's coming to us saying, hey, as a 501c3, what can you all do to help us be a mouthpiece? Because as a 501c3, we are limited with regard to our advocacy, that we would do. And again, we're limited to, well, our funders are paying us to put butts on bikes, vulnerable people getting transportation. I'm not really sure a bike lane in, so-and-so neighborhood is as big of a priority to Tulsa Hub, right? With regard to our mission. So Kara Joy McKee is another person. I mean, when Councillor Ewing was in his position years ago, he was always very interested in Tulsa Hub and in downtown convivial culture, bikes and pedestrians, people being able to gather outside of cars, right? But KJ McKee has also been awesome in reaching out to us and in organizing bike rides to support the current infrastructure that's on the road right now. The last thing I want to say is that oftentimes the elected officials, they are not the people experiencing the problems that rise to the demands, right? For whatever reason, if they don't live in the districts, if they don't use bicycles for transportation, if they're not pedestrians for transportation, if they're not bus users, why would it occur to them that there is these issues, right? So there is a diligence on behalf of the people, but where we're at, like at this time in history again, I think because of the anonymity aspect that social media affords a lot of people, right? They can complain and criticize loudly, but they don't also do their diligence to thank and to steward and to acknowledge, especially in a soft kind of way, right? Like I said, more kind of behind the scenes, reaching out personally, getting groups together personally to be very clear with their interests and with their demands. And until the volume is there, it just doesn't make sense, right? It's strictly an algebraic equation with regard to how money gets spent. And so until the leadership is aware and until the leadership is bought in to it, then, it's just outrage, right? It's just more anger and frustration and venting and perpetuation of people's nervous systems being jacked up once again, So the last thing that I want to say on this topic is that I think we all could do so much better to go slower and to be kinder, right, to each other. I am a driver. For the first time in my life in 12 years, I'm a car owner now because I want to be a professional person using all of my privilege to do a better job for my organization, right? And so I am a cyclist. I'm a cyclist that's been in a near-death experience. I'm a cyclist that trains other cyclists how to ride safely and effectively. I've had a little bit of an opportunity to train other drivers how to drive, considerate to cyclists. Frankly, it's to drive according to the traffic law, right? But every time I get in my car, especially if it's 99 degrees outside and I've had too much caffeine and I haven't had proper sleep and I'm in a hurry and people, I'm distracted and I've got my gadget in my hand and I get behind the wheel and there's a cyclist in front of me, I feel that same rage that every other driver feels, but without having that baseline of myself of, all right, my personal inconvenience of 3 minutes is definitely not as important as this person's safety and their life, right? To take that deep breath and just to calm down and to remember that we all have to share our public facilities, whether it's roadways, sidewalks, transportation systems, etc. I would like to see the conversation focused more on personal responsibility and personal accountability, to being a little bit kinder, to going a little bit slower, and remembering that we are talking about life and death. And, again, I personally can relate to someone that couldn't slow down at a yellow light and went ahead and sped through that yellow light, which cost me, which dramatically changed the course of my life and would have killed me if I wouldn't have been as lucky as I was in that situation. And so, going back to your point about the onus is on the driver of the car, whoever is piloting the more powerful vehicle needs to take on a bigger share of the responsibility. And, that may cause jeers and disdain and a lot of cynicism out there. But until we as citizens decide that we care about each other enough, that we care about ourselves and we care about each other as much as we care about ourselves, that's where I really think the change is going to come from. Elected officials can only do so much with their time and with their budgets and with their responsibility. If we, the people, really take personal responsibility for it, that's when these bigger societal changes are going to come, in my view, from my experience.
That's a great answer. And so I just have a couple more questions. So moving forward, following this, the pandemic response and sort of the phasing back in of people being able to gather and facilities being back opened up, what does Tulsa Hub have planned for the future? I know there's the bike sale on June 6th. Unfortunately, this won't go live to the public, or by the time it goes, that will have already passed, but we're
all right,
featuring
nice.
the bike.
Hope you were there, everybody watching at home.
We will feature the bike sale
Awesome.
on our website.
Thank you.
And,
yeah.
But what do you guys have planned, and what has your pandemic response been so far?
So slowly but surely opening back up. I'd just like to acknowledge that, this virus is also a political issue at this time in history, right? Tulsa Hub had the privilege of our leadership, our board of directors, making the decision that they were going to commit to follow CDC guidelines. And so as soon as, the pandemic really took hold, March 17th-ish, it was around St. Patrick's Day, right? Mm-hmm. Our board approved all of our staff to quarantine, to continue to get paid to work from home for those of us that could. And we had the amazing privilege because our CEO, Julie West, got us the PPP loan, the payroll protection loan. So our funds were able to cover the staff salaries and benefits during the safer at home time. And so some productivity was able to continue. We were still responsive to the public. We were able to take a couple of appointments and service a couple of people as carefully as possible. As the quarantine kind of wore on and as we had more of innate interest, I want to give credit to the workshop leadership, Norm and Rob and Patrick were all very passionate about doing more as time wore on. And as even though they're high-risk individuals, they decided that they were going to start as of May 1st, pretty much, definitely as of May 15th, started operating out of the workshop again. What has changed is that we're strictly by appointment only. We used to have a kind of more of an open atmosphere where anybody could drop in, they would get serviced based on the availability of that small staff. but right now we are limiting it to by appointment only. So people do have to call and make an appointment. If people show up and bang on the door and demand an emergency repair, we make them an appointment. Otherwise, there's other options of bike shops that haven't had the privilege to close. The barrier there again, though, is that you're going to be paying retail cost and work at the schedule availability of that business as well. Mm-hmm. So everything in the workshop is by appointment. Most of us are back on site, and as of June 15th, we all will be back, working out of the office facility, the workshop facility, the warehouse facility, similarly to what it was like before the pandemic hit, and that's fingers crossed that we don't have another spike. There are plenty of projections that are established saying that we might not be through the most intense caseload yet. So keeping our fingers crossed that the pandemic is going to continue, the cases will continue to go down, and that we will continue the CDC's PPE requirements. So everyone at the facility is wearing face masks. We're doing our best to maintain social distance. We've retooled our workshop to where there's now a waiting area in the workshop itself. Customers and clients will not be able to come into the office reception area anymore. We do not have a reception area that serves coffee and donuts anymore. We've got hand sanitizer and hand washing stations, all of that good stuff there. Of course, we are providing masks to people that do not have them, but we're going to continue to follow all of the CDC recommendations with regard to working with the public. The Adult Cycling Empowerment Program will resume. Instead of maxing out those cohorts, typically the class sizes would be between 8 and 12 adults with 2 cycling instructors. Now we're looking at more of like a 2-to-1 ratio. So if we have 2 cycling instructors, we'll be working with 4 people so we can maintain the distance. Luckily, the majority of our work is outside, so there's a little bit of a safer kind of environment there. We're not in close quarters with people when we do the riding education. We typically do a 1-week-long middle school summer camp that is 35 students all in one place, all at one time. That is also adapted to where we're going to be working in cohorts of up to 2 students. And hopefully those students are already in a shelter-in-place kind of scenario. If they're living in the same neighborhood, so they're already playing with each other, their families have already kind of broken their quarantine, regulations, we will be serving families kind of more one at a time over the summer. And we want to give props to the Northwest Tulsa Hub, which is a completely independent organization, a nonprofit that happens to have a similar name as ours. But Wayne Pyle at the Northwest Tulsa Hub and the Common Good facility has invited us to use their facility for training. And so because the Common Good grocery store is not in development yet, we now have the gift of an indoor facility, not climate controlled, but at least protected from the sun. So we'll be able to do our training inside. So we hope that whereas we were kind of at the mercy of, well, if it's above 100, it's not really safe to be doing these longer rides. And then the same thing with the rain, we hope we'll be able to be more consistent with the smaller numbers. So that way we can achieve the goals that we had set out this year. Most of our funders have been very understanding about this. So I do want to thank the people that are supporting us, that get it, that we have chosen to play it as cautiously as possible, but our intention is still to get as many bikes out to the community as possible. So if you're someone at home wondering, okay, well, I have a bike in my garage, can Tulsa Hub service it for me? Yes, as long as the technology is not beyond our level of expertise. But unlike previous summers, you do need to call us to make an appointment, drop it off, and then we'll take it from there. Call you. We can even arrange pickups too. We do ask for a contribution for that service, like any other business would. But sales, repairs, trainings with the public, absolutely, we are open for those operations, but they are strictly by appointment only rather than drop in the way that they've been.
Okay. And when it comes to events, the sort of events that would be featured on Root's website, I saw that you guys had Spoke Easy, which is being postponed to the fall, but any other upcoming things like that that people can look out for, or virtual events or talks?
Right. The bike sale that will have passed by the time people see this We have gone back and forth so long about our concerns about it. I mean, that it is going to be a really hot day and that tensions are kind of high already with social gatherings. We hope that everyone, again, will have been very kind and very patient and very understanding. So this bike sale is kind of our first stab at seeing, can we manage the public with PPE enforcement, with social distance enforcement? Can we make it through that event? We are going to limit the capacity, like the warehouse facility is not going to be open to the public. The yard that surrounds the warehouse facility, we will only allow 50 persons in that perimeter at one time. So, you know, time will tell. I'd love to maybe give an update on the site for those that are curious how it went if people aren't able to make it down. But we've had to have extra personnel to make sure that we are limiting the count of people, as well as to have some extra personnel to support PPE being available to people and being worn, as well as just make sure. I mean, I've gone grocery shopping this week, and even though the attendants that are handing out the carts have masks on their ears, they're not wearing them on their faces, right? Even though they may be wiping off the grocery carts, they're, you know, not wearing gloves and that kind of stuff. The heat adds an additional barrier to that PPE. So just want to give some respect to our first responders and our medical, you know, workers that have to wear that gear all day, every day, and not the most ideal. I have a profound, you know, relatability and empathy to that barrier of challenge that they overcome for all of us to do their jobs, keeping us safe and addressing us. So more will be revealed on the online events. And while we hope that we will be able to reschedule Spokeasy this fall, we again want to wait to watch the numbers. And the other reality, you know, other nonprofits that are watching this might be relating to, if like the 100 or 200 or 500 galas that were going to happen between March and now all get rescheduled in the fall, we don't want to have to make our audience make that hard choice, you know, which of their other causes that they're passionate about, which event might they be willing to go to, especially if it's still, you know, not clear that it is, that we're all clear, or, you know, a lot of people are saying until a vaccine has been developed that it is not safe to gather, you know, in these formerly normal kind of scenarios. So we trust our board and we trust the CDC, and so we'll continue to follow the guidelines that are made available to us from our leadership and from that information.
Great. And my final question is somebody I've been asking everybody who takes part in At a Distance. And now that stuff is reopening, the way I phrase this question has shifted. And what's the one thing you missed most during quarantine?
Hugs. Yeah. You know, every day, everybody that we work with, if it wasn't handshakes, high fives, hugs, you know, I'm a person that cares deeply about, you know, like, you knowing my story and the loss that I've endured, like getting able to connect and to embrace and to touch and to connect with people physically in that way. That's something that I miss the most, but I had no issue whatsoever because I trust that the Center for Disease Control and, you know, frankly, the medical professionals that are in our community. We have retired infectious disease doctors that volunteer with us that laid down the law for us and said, it's just not worth the risk. And so going back to, you know, kind of the misinformation and the disinformation and the propaganda and the confusion that's out there during this, you know, from being a person that was physically incapacitated for upwards of years of my life because of the injuries that I've been through, I surrender, you know, my own needs and my own inconvenience and my own longing and say, at this point, I am a citizen of a country, of a nation, and I have to trust that the government, you know, has the best interest for my welfare and safety in mind. And it's been very challenging, of course, to be at home alone for the most part. You know, you that have been doing these interviews, I'm sure the vibe looking at someone through a screen is not nearly as magic as it would be if you're there in public. But I think it's really cool that we have the opportunity to kind of develop these new skills. if we can't share and connect the way that we're used to, that we've taken for granted maybe, is it possible to continue to build on some of those experiences, and how do we do so? And going back to my number one hope for our humanity, that we can all be kinder and be more patient and be, listen better and go a little bit slower. The quarantine has ultimately been that external accountability in that way for me and for many on our staff. I don't have a family of my own here, but I do have a support network through the Tulsa Hub. And so, we have made a point to write each other a lot more. We've gone back to a lot more letter writing besides the emails and the online kind of convenient stuff. So definitely cannot wait to have a massive group hug with everybody in Tulsa that's interested once we feel like that is safe and proper to do so.
We'll have to schedule that event.
Yeah, for sure. So super cool. I mean, it's like, again, there's power to that human connection, right? That's what any of this is about, right? Is our interest in connecting and being connected to. And so going back to everything that you brought up about bikes, for those that are out there, like Tulsa Hub's capacity, we miss the wave totally, how, bike shops have been like busier than ever before because we were closed in the quarantine, or we were otherwise serving our participants. But if people are willing to make the risk, to take the time that it's going to take and support our mission through the purchase of a bicycle, we do have a staff person now that's totally committed to that. Granted, he's part-time, but there's a form on our website, if you check it out, that has, give us the budget and the dimensions and everything that you're looking for. And after this sale that we've discussed, the warehouse will be a lot more organized. So if people want to get out with their friends that are still strictly social distance, biking or just being outdoors is a great way to do it. So that's my last plug for a way for people to support Tulsa Hub. But even without Tulsa Hub, if you've got a bike at home and you haven't dusted it off during the quarantine, the early morning hours or after the sun goes down, awesome opportunity to explore your neighborhood and just see what it's like. Does the perception meet the reality in terms of trying to use a bike for transportation? And anyone who sees this and is inspired in any way, absolutely welcome contact, communication. Would love to set up some more video chats with some new friends. Our future is totally uncertain in terms of COVID-19, but also, I have to be honest, Mason, like the trend for philanthropy is 75% of individual donations have disappeared. We weren't very well funded through individuals in the first place, so that's not as much of an issue, though I will admit several of our recurring donors have just not come back. But even on philanthropy giving, we're looking at about at least a $50,000 budget deficit right now because of the nature of what's been happening beyond the COVID-19 with the markets and everything else. So we know that we shall endure, we shall overcome. The Tulsa Hub, of next year will look very different than it has in the past, but that's the nature of any business. Of course, we get that. But if people see this particular interview and are inspired to reach out to us, even if you're not a donor or a volunteer, we just want to connect more with people in the community so we can listen, so we can learn.
Thank you. Yeah, and I urge everybody out there watching to give what they can to Tulsa Hub, or just reach out and to speak with you guys, because you have to consider the people who are unemployed right now or losing jobs, who don't have the ability just to drive to a work interview, and you guys are really on the front lines of bridging that gap and helping Tulsa.
Bicycle is a pretty old technology. It hasn't improved that much in 100 years, right? I mean, certainly there's new, shifting and electronics and all of that, but going back to it being a simple solution, a freedom machine, if you as the viewer haven't been in touch with your bike in some time, or you need a bike, that's a great opportunity for us to just share some passion and some enthusiasm to help as we continue to kind of figure out our new equilibrium.
Well, thank you. It's very nice to meet you, and
You as
I hope I
well.
get to connect with you guys on the other side of this in person. And
Awesome, for sure. Yeah, and we'd love ideas. We've tried all these different things to invite the public in. There's kind of a perception like if you're not already into bikes, maybe Tulsa Hub is not for you. But again, like we're not necessarily a biking organization.
Right.
We are a community organization. We are a justice organization. We're making new friends and new relationships. And learning and, civic, culturally minded organization. There's so many things that don't necessarily fit into a quick slogan about what we do. But a lot of the people that have found us and stuck with us, they weren't necessarily bike people. They just sincerely cared about giving and about learning. And so, being in a learning environment that then leads to getting to do more biking, we've always been an open source, crowdsourced, community, held organization. So now is definitely the time for us, as people are coming out of their COVID shells, to make it clear to the community that we do not know what our future will look like. We've tried a lot of different things, and our board, we've got some new philanthropic support actually to help our board kind of go through our first really strategic retreat in several years. And so, again, if someone is not so mechanically interested, they're not so service, they're not interested in doing some kind of direct services, but would like to help on the leadership side, that's always where we make the most innovative growth, is having the leadership be supporting, because where the rubber meets the road, that's a no-brainer. There's plenty of people that we've helped that are always giving back to Tulsa Hub, stewarding the bicycles and the care that they've been given. So the next phase with the organizational development, the organizational leadership side, that's a very, very exciting frontier for us too.
Well, I wish you guys the best. Thank
awesome.
you.
Glad to be connected. And thank you so much for your work. I'm so excited to have one place I can go to learn about all the diversity of engagement that our community is offering.
Yeah, we're trying to do the best we can under the given circumstances. And when we have our full launch, hopefully this fall, as you said, if the numbers go down, it's really going to be something that just, on your iPhone or your computer, you have all the things taking place in Tulsa right at your fingertips. And we
awesome.
Similar mission, just creating more diverse and inclusive Tulsa. And
awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for your leadership. Thank you everybody out there for your time, and can't wait to be in touch.
All right. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.